So I'd like to spend my few minutes this afternoon focused a little bit on Fukushima and Daiichi plant there and what I saw, and then move to my impressions on a visit that I took afterwards to the small fishing community of Rikuzentakata. Now it's been over 2 years since the Tohoku earthquake and the tsunami. We don't hear much in the U.S. about what's taking place in Japan as the cleanup and the rebuilding continues. So I wanted to start with a couple of slides that show the impact to the Fukushima power plant to provide just a perspective on how powerful that tsunami was. Again, this was 2 years ago. Most of us have forgotten. The people in Japan have not forgotten the impact of this. And so it's good to have a little bit of a refresher. Now typically when you think of a tsunami, you think of this large cresting wave that crashes down on everything. In this case, it was more of a large surge of water, this irresistible force that consumed whatever was in its path. So what you have here is the picture of the Daiichi nuclear power plant prior to the tsunami. And then these are a couple of slides that we got from TEPCO. They show the immediate impact of the tsunami on the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant on March 11. This is a picture of the tsunami approaching the tanks in front of units 5 and 6 there. You can see in the back there, that's the seawall. The waves just literally roll right on top of that. The force of these waves, though, the large tank that you see was twisted. It's almost like you would take a wet towel and you just twist it, and you see that tank is literally twisted sideways. The middle tank was moved off of its platform and next to the tank on the left. So literally lifted up and moved over to the left. This next slide is the back of Unit 14 power plant. And then in this next slide here, this is just a few minutes later, just same location, the top of the taller tank that is just above the water there. That's 18 feet high there, so it gives you some impression of what we're dealing with. I had an opportunity to go into the nerve center of the cleanup effort at Fukushima and had a chance to address the workers, speak to the importance of what they're doing. It was, again, keep in mind, this is almost 2 years later that I'm having this visit, and they were still very, very much in a mode of emergency, in the sense that everything was priority. This next one is a power line going to Unit 5. The earthquake that caused the landslide undercut one of the support legs. It caused the tower to collapse, and it cut off the power of the unit. In the background there, you can see new towers that have wider bases to provide for greater stability, but it just literally took the legs out from underneath it. This is Unit 1, which is covered to prevent further release of radioactive material. This is a picture of the tanks holding the radioactive wastewater. The plan is to build approximately 300,000 cubic meters or 8 million gallons of storage capacity. They were working on that at the time. Some of the debris that, again, you're looking at some almost 2 years later. There's a mangled semi-truck. You can see the wheels kind of sticking up there at the bottom. That was left against the seaward side of Unit 4. This bag of rocks is the temporary seawall. This was just a temporary measure that was put in place in the event of potential tsunami still. This is the administrative office building here. The windows were blown out, not necessarily by the waves, but by a hydrogen blast from Unit 1. The exterior of Unit 4, with a structure on the right side being built to remove the spent fuel pool. it's really very hard to get a sense of how powerful a force the tsunami was until you see it in person. Just the mangled mess of the concrete, of the steel, of the wire, of the rebar, the glass. Again, these tanks that are literally twisted, lifted up off their foundations. And then you think about the impact of all that and the chaos, and then the release of radioactive material on top. The impression going into the area where the power plants were, you drive through a small city. Residents of this area have been evacuated, of course. They were allowed to return to their homes just a couple times during the course of the preceding year. They couldn't remain overnight, but they could go into their homes, they could remove some personal items. But it was really quite eerie. It was like going through a ghost town where you literally expect to see sagebrush rolling down the road. The need to scrape the soil from the surface remains a work in progress. You just go by these fields, big open fields, and just the process to remove that soil is one step, but then you have to go further than that. What do you then do with the soil? So there's many, many near and long-term issues that remain to be resolved here. So after a day there at Fukushima Daiichi and going through and meeting with folks there, understanding more what the cleanup process would entail, we went further up north to the coastal town of Rikuzen-Takata. The reason that I chose to go to this particular fishing village is this is where a jet teacher from Alaska, a gentleman by the name of Montgomery Dixon, had been teaching. He taught in 16 different schools around the area and had last been in Rikuzen-Takata. He was one of the 2 Americans who lost their lives in the tsunami, and so I wanted to go to the community, basically pay my respects. It was interesting and perhaps very coincidental that Monty's last lesson at his public English course, this was 4 days before the tsunami, he taught a lesson about emergency equipment and what you might need, whether it's flashlights or portable radios, medical supplies. So again, quite coincidental. Now, Rikuzen-Takata was really hammered by this tsunami. 24,000 residents there in this village. 1,700 lost their lives in the tsunami. 15,000 became refugees in their own hometown. Nearly 80% of the buildings were either completely or partially destroyed. So this is a picture of Rikuzen-Takata just before the tsunami's strike. It's particularly poignant to me because it looks like so many of the coastal towns in Alaska. I've got 2 of my interns that are here with me today. One's from Kodiak, Alaska, which was particularly hard hit in 1964 when we had a major earthquake and a tsunami. So you looked at it and you just kind of felt at home. The trees in the picture there, right along the shoreline, are part of a 70,000 pine tree forest that were planted a couple hundred years ago to protect the country, or to protect this little area in a seemingly protected harbor. But they were put there to protect from a tsunami. But unfortunately, this protective forest shielded the residents' view of any approaching tsunami, and it really did limit the time that they had to react and to move out of harm's way. In this next, you can see the water literally breaching that pine forest and spilling into the town. And the wave just keeps coming in and coming in and coming in. This is a picture of downtown Rikuzen-Takata before the tsunami, and that's what it looked like when we were there in January. The pine forest that I showed you earlier that was sitting at the coastline there, and then after the tsunami, this sole remaining pine tree was dubbed the miracle tree. And you can see why. Every other tree was completely obliterated. And for whatever reason, this one tree remained standing. But the residents really view this tree as the symbol of strength, of resiliency, and perseverance as they work to now rebuild their community. So there's a lot of symbolism behind this tree, and you could absolutely feel it when we were there. This is a picture of the City Hall just prior to the tsunami, and this is that same building afterwards, just the way it just came all the way through. Keep in mind, the City Hall sat about a mile back from the coastline, about a mile back. And these buildings were wiped out. Everything from the 4th floor and below was wiped out by these waves. So when we visited in January, there were still buildings that were being taken down even 2 years afterwards. That's one where, again, structure is being held together just by the rebar, but that's the way it is, at least in January. I don't know whether this particular one was already taken down. This is an apartment building that, I need to go back one more. It's about 500 yards from the shoreline, and as you can see, the wave hit the first 4 floors, leaving the 5th floor intact. It was kind of interesting. We actually walked through the bottom floor of that building. There's no, things aren't fenced off. You could just walk through. We walked in, and really quite poignant. There were still some personal articles that were kind of left in the silt and the mud. One was a box that had a doll on it. Articles of clothing that were still there, again, some 2 years later. So where the homes and the businesses were concentrated, they're now these heaps of rubbish. But in true Japanese style, being very fastidious, these are the cleanest rubbish piles I've ever seen. There was one pile that was nothing but concrete, one that was nothing but bits of metal, one that were piles of dirt. It was really quite remarkable. Some temporary housing sites where units were moved into next to an elementary school. This is the old City Hall. When I visited, the City Hall then became a makeshift memorial site for locals to leave items to remember their lost loved ones by. So we'd come in and basically set up a little shrine there. Just directly across from City Hall was the school administration building where Monty Dixon had been at the time of the tsunami. I guess the safe house, for lack of a better term. In the event of tsunami, you're supposed to go to City Hall. This is where you're supposed to go for safety. So he went next door, and I was there when he was taken out by the tsunami. I had a chance while I was there to say a few words in memory of Monty Dixon, talk about the JET program and how important that had been to so many, and was able to share some things from his family in Alaska at the shrine that was set up there. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it in this next slide, but on the back, behind that pillar, there's 2 red X's that are on the wall. An X was placed in those locations where bodies were found after the tsunami. So even, again, 2 years later, very emotionally raw, just very, very difficult. I had a chance to sit down at lunch with some of the students that Monty Dixon had taught, and it was one of those just really good feel-good sessions with these young people. So it was a good way to spend the afternoon. At that same luncheon, I also had an opportunity to visit with some fishermen from the area. We had gone that morning to visit an oyster farming operation, and if you've ever had an opportunity to eat oysters in Tokyo, it probably came from Rikuzen Takata or right in that area. But they were just getting their operations back underway, and great conversation to see how, in extraordinarily difficult times where you're rebuilding, how you get your business back together again. So at the lunch where I met with the students, but then also with the fishermen, it was a pretty solemn lunch. It was a pretty sobering conversation. These local fishermen, their life, of course, is their sea, and they have effectively lost their livelihoods because they're not yet able to get out into the water. But it's more than just a livelihood. It was as if they had lost their sense of identity. And as they're trying to figure out how they regroup, get gear back, get their boats fixed, it's more than just getting the necessities to get back in the water. There is a fear, at least amongst these fishermen that I visited with. There's some difficulty and nightmares and fears that when they bring up the nets, they might be bringing up remains of friends and neighbors, of nightmares that are just very, very difficult for these folks. Some have lost more than others. Those that were up on the hillside were clearly more fortunate, but those that didn't lose are walking around with a sense of guilt that they didn't suffer as much as their colleagues or their neighbors, and so they're working themselves to exhaustion in a form of compensation. And what I saw play out there was so similar to what we saw in Alaska, not only after the earthquake and the tsunami in 1964, but more recently with the oil spill caused by the Exxon Valdez that literally shut down many of our coastal fishing communities in South Central. The fishermen whose livelihoods and identities have been associated with the sea, all of a sudden were no longer fishing. They were helping with cleanup. So they're all busy. Once that cleanup is over, where is their purpose? And that was exactly what I was seeing with these fishermen as we visited. That was exactly what I was hearing from some of the international relief workers. How you deal with issues of depression, suicide, domestic violence, all the things, alcoholism, all the things that come when you have a tragedy. You don't really quite know how to handle it. And so it was just a heartfelt reminder that as a country, we can be there to help with dollars, we can be there to help with our experts, but we also need to be there to help with sharing of the pain, if you will. We lived through this not too many years ago with Hurricane Katrina, and the rebuild in the Gulf is again very similar to what the people in Rikuzen Takata are hoping for as well. And one of the things that I heard so clearly, and it was most poignantly expressed by the school children, I said, what can the United States do to help? And they said, please don't forget us here. We're so afraid that all the focus and the attention was on us right after the tsunami. But now that's over, and we're just afraid that you're going to forget us. I had a very good meeting with the mayor of Rikuzen Takata, Toba Futoshi. He lost his wife in the tsunami, and he has dedicated his service to rebuilding his community. He's raising 2 young boys. But the single most important message that I would like to convey to you was one that was shared with me by the mayor, and he said, being here, seeing with your own eyes, identifying how you feel about our situation here, if you could go home and share these thoughts with your family and friends, we believe people will continue to keep us in your thoughts. Please, everyone, please do come to this disaster area. We welcome you. We would like for you to see our city. We do not want to be forgotten. This is our hope. And it was just a good reminder to us all that we don't forget our friends. And we don't forget our friends, particularly in our time of need and life or death. Everybody is there at the time of the funeral. But we need to remember to be checking in with them long after that funeral. We need to be remembered to check in with our friend and our ally, Japan. So they sent me off with a really warm and fuzzy message. They adopted this mascot to lift the spirits of the community. It certainly made me smile. But again, great reminder of all that we can be doing to work together on this. I've taken this message to folks back home in Alaska. I've talked with people in some of our smaller fishing communities that, in my view, have great commonality with the Gesundheit. I've encouraged them to have sister partnerships. I've gone to the University of Alaska Anchorage and the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where we have Japanese programs and have encouraged, again, some partnering, some sharing of ideas. So that will be my message to you all, whether it's represent Takata or what we might be able to do in other areas where our friends are living with the aftermath of a horrible, horrible tragedy. Let's be there for them. Let's not take